One of the things that boards typically do is just look at outcome data that's so after the fact and really does not include metrics on the how we created these results. And so we don't want to just create metrics to have metrics. We want to create metrics to incentivize behavior, help organize processes.
That was Steve Charles, an entrepreneur and a board member at Temple University and the lead donor for Temple's Charles Library that I had the pleasure of planning. It was a real career highlight. And he's really my go-to guy when it's time to geek out on governance and really to think deeply about how groups come together to make decisions, especially decisions they've never made before. And we had a great conversation about that I think you're really going to enjoy. Welcome to the Connected College podcast. I'm your host, Elliot Felix. I've helped more than 100 colleges and universities change what they offer, how they operate, and how they're organized to enable student success. And if you're a leader in higher ed and you think that the silos and separations get in the way of student success, then this podcast and my book, The Connected College, are for you. We're here to learn and work together to bust silos, question tradition, and forge partnerships so that students feel connected to their college, their community, their coursework, and their careers. Delighted to have Steve Charles here with us and to talk about the role of the board in enabling student success. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Elliot.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up as a board of trustee member.
I must confess that for the first few decades after going to Temple University, I never circled back. I struggled, was not all that successful until I started a company in my early 40s. And pretty soon an advanced person from Temple reached out. And that was the beginning of a relationship that I guess has been going on now for about 10 years. And just started by supporting some scholarships in the school that I had graduated from, and then ultimately joining the board of trustees for, I believe it's 8 years.
That's awesome. And in the small world department, the Charles Library is something I had the pleasure of leading the library planning effort of working with Noheda, and that's definitely a highlight of my career. Thinking about your journey to the board as an alum and through your career, today's conversation is really about the journey that students are on and how they can be successful. And I'd love to hear your definition of student success.
Yeah, it really does vary depending on the individual. I worked my way through school, and for me, it was a matter of getting decent grades while also holding down practically a full-time job. But I loved school so much, I would just take classes I was interested in. And all of a sudden I realized, wait a minute, I don't know, somebody pointed it out to me. It was like, if you want to actually get a degree, you're going to have to get a certain number of credits in a particular area. And so then I got focused in on actually complete, but I guess it took me closer to 5 years to actually get done because I just studied whatever I enjoyed. I guess I just didn't know how the whole system worked. Today, success means that students actually understand options and are much more closely connected to folks within the university, because I think for many people, college is a time of trying things and realizing what you're not good at, and then realizing what you are good at. And you have to be able to run down some dead end streets and be able to turn around and get maneuvered. And so what I'm focused on is trying to help the university become more student centric and more digitally connected with students so that they can actually do that exploring and not get locked into a path that isn't making sense for them.
So for you, student success is getting that
careful balance of exploration and focus and understanding your options and being able to make choices and pivot as you learn and grow.
That's very different from someone who is on a very rigid track, say toward a particular profession. It's all very structured. And if the person is very happy doing that, that's great. But if the reason you went to college was to learn about a lot of different things and try to figure things out and figure out where your role is before committing to a track, you need a lot more frequent touches with people who actually know what they're talking.
You mentioned your aim is more student centric and more digitally connected. What role do you think boards of trustees play in enabling student success?
Let's start by being clear here. Boards of trustees are really supposed to be above it all and not really get down into operations and undermine the president's authority and direction and the organization that exists. So trustees who actually want to see things change in a university, who learn things from different folks around the enterprise, are particularly challenged to then raise the concept to conversation at a board level that would then get an administration to actually get involved.
So you talked about like the board should be above it all, not into operations, so they're not undermining the administration. But where they can play a role is in prompting conversation about change or reform. How does that play out in shared governance?
First of all, yeah, it takes time. So you have to be patient. And then it's quite iterative. Certain committees working with our corresponding administrators, whether it's for student success, the provost, into the metrics that indicate progress toward improving ultimate outcomes. One of the things that boards typically do is just look at outcome data that's so after the fact and really does not include metrics on the how we created these results. And so we don't want to just create metrics to have metrics. We want to create metrics to incentivize behavior, help organize processes so that we're measuring the raw materials, the ingredients, as it were, that help create the big outcomes that we're looking for.
So one thing that a board can do as part of a shared governance model is identify meaningful metrics that are steps along that path to a larger outcome measure like graduation rate or career placement that lets you know you're headed in the right direction.
Correct. So it's more granularity in measuring activity and micro results that allow managers to maybe tweak process or allocate resources differently so that we're not waiting until the very end of the process to say, oops, we missed our number. We are actually understanding what it's going to take to make our number. And we are seeing whether or not we're going to make our number because of all the little things that we're watching. Now, the problem is that you can't have the board asking for it. This has to be something that the administration wants to implement with its teams. And so at the board level, you're just saying, hey, let's just get started. Let's get started. And maybe each year we can revisit this and we can get a little smarter and have a little more data and a little more automation in our workflows. And we are always adjusting those incremental metrics.
I like that idea of understanding that there's all sorts of little things you're watching along the way. You're not trying to make adjustments at the end. You're trying to make adjustments as you go, as you learn more.
So you can predict as well as adjust. And then ultimately, we do this in business. We would say, look, if we have to change a metric each quarter because we're learning more, we're going to do that. We're not going to lock in and wait till next year to make some.
What do you think is changing the way boards work within higher ed? Are there outside forces, changes, pressures that boards are responding to so that they have to work differently tomorrow than they are today?
Well, I think boards need to take seriously this rather alarming statistic that the average tenure now of a president is less than 5 years. Does the board maybe have a role to play here in maybe helping make the institution be more systematic in how it does things so that the president isn't just burning out fighting fires? I think we need to start asking ourselves those questions. And I think we need to do it in a collaborative way with administrators and faculty. These are really hard things to get your arms around and actually get focused on and then act on.
Yeah.
But I do believe that if you can build the connective tissue between the president, chairperson of the board, and the president of the faculty senate to where these big concepts are actually being discussed, and the idea that we're going to be just a lot more systematic and more institution wide, enterprise wide in our thinking of what we do as a system, I think we can make progress. But we have a really long way to go because today a student expects to get everything that's relevant to what they have to do in their hand. And to do that, our information needs to flow and our little text alerts about when something is due or this or that need to be totally personal, totally timely and relevant. That's all data driven. That's systems. And getting faculty and staff and everything to adopt these newer processes without feeling marginalized or without feeling like they're just being asked to become part of a machine is a really important s- socializing process that we really need to go through.
So you've got changing student expectations and technology needs and the need for information to flow and also to be monitored as part of meaningful metrics. And you've also got like shrinking presidential tenure as the job gets harder and people burn out quicker and quicker. Are there other external forces, social, economic, cultural, that are changing the way boards work?
I would suggest we wrestle with this idea of different kinds of decisions needing that part of the design process include how and when the different constituencies are included, either as providing input or being part of analysis and reporting out or analyzing trade offs and ultimately making the decision. Is it an administration decision or is it a board decision? I just feel if we build this more holistic systems approach to engaging people the right way, the right time through a process, if that was just part of the playbook, whenever something comes up, just like it is today for tenure, I think we'd have something. I think it would go a long way toward building understanding and appreciation for what each role played, as well as building a lot of trust along the way.
Right back to that burnout and presidential tenure point. I think that the idea that colleges are making big decisions that they've maybe never made before, I think is really interesting. Colleges that are thinking about closure and consolidation and mergers and acquisitions that they don't have a template for or a playbook for.
I
And they
think it's
probably have to make them
fine.
faster.
They should be able to make the decision faster and because they have engaged all the right people in the right way.
Yeah.
And so the decision shouldn't be the big event. It should just be another step in this natural continuum of activities that very quickly leads to implementation and evaluation and maybe reconsideration or whatever. We need faster, more routine loops through these processes so that it's not a big deal if somebody brings something up. Um, we know how to like engage all the right people, bring all the right data in. And I just think that if the board said, that's our job is to help make sure that this happens with the president, rather than just sitting back and leaving it all up to the president to make decisions. And we'll just watch the bottom line and make sure everything's good. If we actually took a little bit of a more proactive approach to make sure that we could articulate the system's view of things and make sure that everybody's input is getting analyzed, whether it's in some faculty group, then goes to administrative group. Because if it's something that requires implementation, if you haven't involved the people up front, how are you going to implement? So I just feel like the kinds of things that we're wrestling with these days really do ask us to be a little more engaged appropriately at this system level, more than just we're the fiduciary, we watch the bottom line, and we're just watching all the after the fact stuff.
Yeah, I get you said earlier, like all the little things we're watching, which I think is such an interesting way of thinking about it, right? Like you're looking along the funnel or along the path, not just the inputs and the outputs. And in our last couple minutes here, what other advice do you have for board members across higher ed? You've talked about making decisions and focusing on oversight, not operations, and meaningful metrics and shared governance. What else should board members or senior administration working with boards, what should they do to better enable student success?
At least personally, I would really like to know a lot more about the detail of all the micro activities actually spell student success. I just think that if you put it in the form of a flow chart and thought about the touches to the different systems and what it looks like for the life of a student rolling through from beginning to end, first of all, it would be mind numbing, but a handful of people would get over that and would start to say, hey, how can we make everything we do more student centric? Rather than telling the students that this is how we're organized and say, you go to this office for that, office for that, and you have to pick up the phone, as opposed to places that seem to have reorganized things to where all of that disappears. And they're basically interacting with a chatbot, and the human jumps in when the AI signals that it looks like this pattern indicates that we need a human involved. But other than that, they get what they need at 3 a.m. That's happening at places like Georgia State now.
Yeah, it strikes me, and this is maybe a good place to stick the landing, but it strikes me that when you're talking about these things and you're talking about, for instance, educating the board on all the key steps along the student journey and getting into detail, a lot of times that detail isn't shared with the board because there's a lack of trust. And it seems to me like trust might be one of these foundational things, because if you don't have it, then there's going to be less risk taking, there's going to be less reporting, there's going to be less of all the things you've mentioned.
The idea that a new chief executive could come in and say, listen, we're going to try stuff. That's great, but there has to be structure to that. Has to be thought through. That has to be designed, and quick evaluation and interpretation of the read on what's going on, and an ability to make tweaks. That's a whole process. It's more than just saying, hey, we're going to let you take more risks, and we want you to be able to fail because we know that you need to be able to fail and figure out and fail fast, or we won't enter. It's really hard to change people who have operated completely opposite. So how do you bring them along in this way of saying, we're going to try new things. We're not going to guarantee that they work 100%, but these are the reasons we're doing it because the system is asking us to do this.
Right.
The holistic view is saying, this is what we need to create. And so to do that, this is how the information flows. This is how the workflows are going to proceed. And we know we're going there, and we know we're going to have to start with things that are simpler, and then we're going to get to things that are complex. What person in a university is going to lead that? The only reason I was interested in a board seeing the complexity of that would be appreciating the leadership required to redesign the plane while we're flying.
And to me, that's where design comes in, right? Because the idea of a structure in which you can experiment and thinking holistically and thinking systematically and focusing on people, those are like the core tenets of design.
What would the operating system model of a universe really look if we were thinking of it as a system, processes, workflows, doing the work creates all the data that we need to see how we're doing on every front? What would the layers be? And
Right.
then you say, okay, so we have these layers. So now let's tackle one issue. Let's just talk about enrollment. Something narrowly focused that would be something that everybody cares about, that would be a way to explode out the complexity, but say, we have frameworks for this. We know how to think about this. We know how to get organized, rather than just throwing our hands up in the air and just saying, that office takes care of that. This office takes care of that. Yeah, I don't know, we don't communicate very well. We could do better at communicating, but we never build a system. We need an architecture for how we approach things. And these are the places you start. You start here, and then over time, you can deal with issues and data that are more sensitive. So that there would be a playbook on how we modernize these complex bureaucracies. We have a 30-year-old framework, and we keep adding new rules to it, little workarounds.
Yeah, higher ed definitely grows through accretion. As we wrap up, your thinking about the operating system got me thinking about the book called Brave New Work, which you might enjoy. And the cornerstone, or the kind of the anchoring idea of that book, is this operating system canvas, which I think has 9 different boxes. And it's a way of kind of like breaking down any organization and thinking about it like an operating system. You might enjoy that. Steve, thank you so much. This is really great.
Thanks for listening to the Connected College podcast. Subscribe to my Connected College newsletter at elliottfelix.com for insights and excerpts from my upcoming book, tools you can download, and special offers. You can also find more information about talks I've given, articles I've written, and upcoming events there. And please support the podcast by rating and reviewing it wherever you're listening. Let's create connected colleges where students will succeed.